Welcome to Troubleshooting Innovation, a commercial baking podcast, sponsored by Oaks. Worldwide since 1946, Oaks is your partner for mixing and depositing process solutions in commercial baking. I'm your host, Joanie Spencer, Editor-in-Chief of Commercial Baking, and I'm spending this season with Marc and Elana Schulman, the second and third generations of leadership at Chicago-based Eli's Cheesecake. We are exploring innovation, growth, longevity, and resilience through the eyes of a family-owned bakery. In this episode, we learn about the foundation of resilience and reinvention on which founder Eli Schulman built this family legacy. Hi, Marc and Elana. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, good afternoon. Great to be with you.
Thanks for having us. We're so excited to be here.
Well, I just love this story, you guys. So I am so grateful for you to take time to share these next 5 weeks with our audience and just learn the history of Eli's and see where you're heading into the future. So I thought we would just sort of start off with a quick history and take a little walk down memory lane and talk about how Eli Schulman started Eli's Cheesecake.
So my dad, Eli Schulman, our founder, was a Chicago restaurateur who had gone into the restaurant business in 1940 and had really a wonderful history of operating restaurants in Chicago over the next 50 years. And he always had a dream, which was to create a signature dish that he could take outside of the restaurant and sell on a broader basis. So in Eli's The Place for Steak, which was the legacy restaurant where he developed his cheesecake recipe, he was famous for many things. If it was calf's liver Eli, or certainly steaks, chopped liver. And we feel very fortunate that he really came upon cheesecake because it obviously has so many applications as the basis to take outside the restaurant. So there was Eli at the age of 70 at the first Taste of Chicago on July 4th, 1980, taking his cheesecake for the first time to the public to see and to experience. So we always know when our birth date is. And it really created this just tremendous foundation for us to grow for the next 43 years.
Wow. Okay. So this is really interesting. I kind of know your history, and we got to do a live podcast earlier this year at ASB's Baking Tech, and we kind of had a chuckle over the fact that you could have gone into the liver business, and we're all like so grateful that you went the cheesecake route instead. But I don't think I realized that your dad was 70 when he took his first cheesecake to Taste of Chicago.
Well, Eli was always a dreamer. And I think when you mentioned liver, years before we had been on a vacation and he saw a liver dish on the menu and he had a vision for what that was. And then that became Liver Eli, which before cheesecake was his most famous creation. But it just shows to the creativity of Eli that he was always thinking about what's next? What do I do? As a restaurateur, he was way ahead of the curve of saying, hey, how do I take something outside of the restaurant and sell it on a broader basis? So as we talk resilience and long term, certainly selling cheesecake on a national and international basis was much better than operating out of one restaurant in through COVID and other times in our history.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute. The point when the cheesecake sort of became the product and not the restaurant, what did that look like?
I think Eli was always promoting, and I think we were fortunate when under Mayor Jane Byrne, Chicago had the first Taste of Chicago. It was on July 4th, 1980, and they shut Michigan Avenue down for the day. No one really knew what to expect, and there were these, huge lines, and suddenly a whole new category of people who had never been to Eli's, a place for steak, had that ability to get the cheesecake. When I left practicing law, which was a couple years later, we saw the interest and the opportunities in people loving Eli's cheesecake. And I think with Eli's history as a host and celebrity, they really went hand in hand in that ability to say, hey, you could experience the best of Eli's anywhere in the country. So we were just really fortunate to build upon all that goodwill from the restaurant in making a really great dessert. In the beginning, it was 4 flavors of cheesecake. And then certainly over the years, leveraging that into many categories and other types of desserts that we make today.
Yeah, and it's pretty incredible to think, he built this successful restaurant, which was not his first business endeavor. And then at age 70, he had this incredible dessert that he was able to take to Taste of Chicago, and it was gaining all of this notoriety. How did that sort of evolve into the need for its own production facility? Had you come into the business at that point? How did it become, we have something here that we got to take this out of the restaurant and really start producing this at scale?
Right. It took a few years. And then in 1984, we signed the lease on the first bakery that was half a mile south of where we're located today. And that really gave us the ability to grow the business, to expand, start recruiting the great people, a number of whom have joined us, but people with us today. And then really getting into the creativity side as the needs of our customers evolved. First, people knew us for Eli's signature cheesecake, those first 4 flavors. Well, over those years, those offerings have evolved in many different directions in addition to the cheesecake.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are now, you're just known for so much beyond just a classic cheesecake dessert. And, when I was putting the questions together for this episode in particular, when I was kind of thinking about what it was like going into that first facility, technology in the 80s and in the 90s, when you went into your next facility, it looked a lot different than it does today. And it made me think of watching a movie, like watching an action movie that's 10 or 15 years old, and like the CGI and the special effects that we thought were so groundbreaking when the movie first came out, we look back on it now and we're like, wow, there wasn't much there. So can you kind of reflect on what was so groundbreaking at that time?
It's so interesting about bakeries and bakery equipment. On one hand, yes, today, all of our equipment, the new equipment has computers, works off networks and the technology. But at the same time, we have equipment here that's over 40 years old that really does a job that hasn't changed. And I think the things that we do in our business, we deposit. So the depositors have certainly evolved and gotten far bigger and more technology. We mix, same thing in mixing, ovens. When we went into our first facility, it had been a bakery and commissary for ARA, and there were revolving ovens in that facility, more of a pizza type oven. So those were the first ovens that we used. We later added rack ovens to that bakery. And then when we moved to our current facility in 1996, you went, with a tunnel oven and more rack ovens. Cutting equipment, certainly always, a big thing in our business is, how do you cut the desserts? And that technology has certainly evolved in ways that we're able to do it, more efficiently. And then you get into all of the, packaging equipment, which faster, better package, individually wrap new things that we didn't do before. So I think the good news is that in our industry, there are really great resources to help guide us. And as we now finish our expansion, looking at additional capital, but the good news about bakery equipment, it has a fairly long life, and we've even sold off equipment that's 20 years old and gotten pretty significant prices. So people still saw the value of that equipment for the future.
Wow, that's awesome. And then I just imagine sort of paying it forward and helping another bakery that might be a smaller operation be able to use like really tried and true, reliable equipment to help them get started when they maybe don't have the capital to invest in modern technology right now.
Right. And I would add on that. So when we did lease our first facility, it had been a bakery before, and I mentioned the ovens, but there was a freezer. There were other pieces of equipment that we were able to use because, certainly the challenge in any business is, how do you take it to scale and how do you grow without either taking on so much debt that you can't repay it or trying to get investors. So, I'd say in our business, we've always had a facility of innovating, going as quickly as we could, but at the same time, finding the appropriate time. So, we never tried to bet the store on one product or one idea, that we maintained a lot of flexibility as we grew.
Yeah. And I think just in knowing the whole story, even back further than the restaurant, your dad was very entrepreneurial, but he was also, is it fair to say that he was very calculated in the risks that he took? Because it seemed like he didn't try one thing, fail, and try another thing. He sort of built on everything that he did in business. Is that a safe assumption?
No, I think absolutely. Eli was a child of the Depression and grew up in that time. So I think you understand, the value of goodwill. You understand the importance of taking care of customers, of quality. So I think that those values he gave to us, and I think that those are very important as we, work to build the business for the future. My dad would say, there's no value that you can put on goodwill in your name. So working very hard to maintain that standard of customer responsive quality, things that probably a private equity owned business or maybe a major corporation wouldn't have the personal approach that Eli had for his customers or that Elana and I work for to maintain today.
This episode of Troubleshooting Innovation is sponsored by Oaks, dedicated to serving the R&D requirements for customers by creating an easy and accurate transition from lab to production. Bakers can visit Oaks' R&D lab in person or virtually to run their own custom product trials with Oaks' equipment. Head to www.oaks.com. That's www.oakes.com to learn more. So I'm hearing you describe the criteria and priorities that you had when you got that manufacturing facility. But I also heard you when you said you were actually in the law practice, right?
Yes.
So at what point did you come into the family business? And I know Elana, the same. She didn't start off on the path of the bakery. So I want to start with you, Marc, and what that point was that you came into the family business and said, yes, this is where I need to be.
I left the practice of law full-time in early 1984, knowing that there was a lot of opportunity, but it's something that, my father just, he was pretty busy with the restaurant, wasn't really in a position to do. And, as a lawyer, I always had this concern 40 years after my father died, would I stay a lawyer so no one would know what Eli's Cheesecake was or had been? Or would I go into the restaurant business and pursue that? But no one would be a host like Eli. And also, ultimately our building that Eli's, the Place for Steak, was located in, got torn down. So what would have happened then? So I'm pretty fortunate in my career that for Elana and I, we're there telling the story, Eli's story every day. When I was a lawyer, I represented a lot of family businesses like ours. And, you'd see the great successes or challenges. But, the great thing about the family business is that the conclusion isn't written. You make things happen. When you're a lawyer, it's much more transactional in terms of representing people. So it was great. It was great to work with my father for, the years I did work with him before he passed away very untimely in 1988. And it's a lot of fun to be able to tell that story, his story, every day with Elana.
And it feels like in the battle of head versus heart, your heart led, and it seemed very easy for your head to follow that lead.
Absolutely. And I think, as a lawyer, you learn a lot of technical skills, but, the people skills are most important. And the great thing about the food business is everybody loves to talk food. Everybody loves to talk desserts. And certainly people love to talk cheesecake. So it's a much more fun way to spend your career.
Yeah. So Elana, tell me what it was like from your perspective, just growing up in this foodie family, but also a very entrepreneurial family, because you didn't at first follow the path into the bakery directly either. So what was it like growing up in the Schulman house where there was steak and liver, cheesecake and ideas?
I mean, it was so much fun. I'm so lucky that I got to experience the steakhouse for like the first 15 years of my life. I think growing up in the restaurant like completely shaped my personality and understanding really of what it takes to be in that business, how you treat customers, how you treat the people you work with. I think seeing both sides of that transaction and interaction is really, really interesting. And I feel like I've always said like everyone should have a job in a restaurant or working in retail because I think it makes you a better person. You see like, how you should treat people and how much work goes into really creating a really like impactful experience. So I grew up in the steakhouse and would spend summers coming to the bakery. I mean, I think just watching my dad manage both of those parts of the business, he handled it so well and he was so present in our lives. But I mean, can you imagine running a commercial bakery during the day and then you have 3 kids and a wife and then at night you're going to your restaurant? I mean, it's a pretty wild lifestyle. I understood really what it meant to work really hard and just be so driven and also then to at the same time always be really grateful for what you have and really kind to people and treat people really well. Like that's the most important thing. I remember drives with my dad where we would drive around the city because my dad is really passionate about Chicago architecture and the city itself and just talk to me about business and what's important. And it was always like, you do well in business so that you can invest in other people's lives. So that's like, I think my childhood in a nutshell. And that's why I really wanted to come into the business. And, my dad and I sit here all the time and we just like talk about how lucky we are that we get to tell Eli's story. And that's always what's been really important for me in hearing the story of how my dad really created the cheesecake part of the business, because that was really the driving factor, like that we are able to continue telling that family history and that story. So I always knew I wanted to go into it, but I thought it was really important to work for other people. So when I went to school, I was a film major. I think my dad was a little confused by that. It turned out to be like a really great time to be a film major, because then I worked in video production, and it sort of hit at this time where every major company wanted video. And so had a lot of great experience working in food video production, in documentary film, and then came back to Eli's in 2019 and joined full time. And it's been amazing. I just love being here. I love the energy. I love the people. And I think, as my dad said, like, it's a joyful business. Like, we get to bring people together through our cheesecake and be a part of their celebrations, happy moments. And there's really nothing better than that.
And, that's a really good point that you both said. This is what you make is a very joyful product. And all baked goods are joyful. But whereas, say, bread is sort of a staff of life and it is a necessity, cheesecake and desserts really in general, this is a product that is based in happiness, and it caps off a meal. And it's like, just when you think everything's great, you get a piece of cheesecake and suddenly it's better. Dessert makes things better. What is that day-to-day like to create happiness? Can you have a bad day when you're making cheesecake? Like, how do you balance business and seriousness while creating something that you are trying to make people happy by delivering?
It's such a good question. I mean, I'm going to let my dad weigh in too, but I think, business is stressful. Manufacturing is really, really hard. Like, you know it better than anyone. There's just so many factors at play and things change constantly. But I think it is really important to like always remind yourself what the goal is. And the goal is to bring joy to people's lives through desserts. And so I think it's always bringing us back to that point. But I think that you have to remind people of that and remind yourself, because I do think that it can get really, really hard. And I know we're going to talk about the pandemic and really challenging times. And my dad's been through far more challenging times than I have in this business. But at the end of the day, you have to really be conscious of that and make sure that everyone on board sort of remembers why you're doing what you're doing.
And I would add that the great thing about cheesecake, and we see it in comments on social media or letters, or when you meet people and they tell you, hey, I've had Eli's cheesecake, pumpkin cheesecake on my table at Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter for 30 years. People tell us, I was there at the first Taste of Chicago, or when I go to Taste, I have to go to Eli's. And it is that involvement that the customer has with the brand. And I think, as you know, Joanie, my wife, Maureen, who's our publicist and also was the lead author, and worked with Elana on the second edition of our cookbook, the Eli's Cheesecake Cookbook. You tell the story of our people, the story of the big cakes we've done over the years, how people, if it's, President Obama or President Clinton, have interacted with it. So I think it's an extremely huge honor to be able to do that and do this in real time. A lot of times you'll hear about a brand and they'll say, brand's been around for 100 years. But like the last time it was really sort of an independent family business was 60 years ago. They really haven't done anything unique or novel since. And we do it if it's our work in the community, if it's big cakes, events. I think every day, we're dedicated to creating these great desserts, but also to making a difference. And so there's a lot at play every day, but that's the great thing about what the business allows us to do, and that we have extremely talented people developing the products, making the products, and really going to a far bigger scale than we really ever thought was possible.
Yeah. And that's something that I think is really special about this company, is that this is a very classic dessert. It's a very classic product that you're making. in a very mature industry. Yet you guys know how to innovate and stay relevant and do new things and try new things and like you said, make a difference. I mean, you're doing good in the community as well. And I guess I'm just going to ask you one quick question to close this first episode out. And it's a bonus question that I didn't tell you I was going to ask, but do you think Eli could have predicted that this is what it would have become?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember a few things, like a few months before he died, I had taken him to the land to show him where we were building. Now, it took us 8 years after he had died to make it possible, but, he saw it. I also remember we had a leader in the food business who was leading a much larger food company. And Eli said, and this was a year before he died, hey, you're going to be there. You can do it. And I see the goodwill that he created for us, the values. So, yeah, he knew, if anything, if he came back, he'd probably say, should have probably done a few more things. My father was very easy and the best to work with, but, I think he had pretty high standards. So I think he would say, yeah, this is I always knew it would be.
That is wonderful. I was really hoping that was going to be the answer. Marc and Elana, I am so excited to continue this conversation for the next few weeks. We are going to talk next week. We'll talk about how Eli's Cheesecake sort of set the standard for what the Chicago style of cheesecake is. And that's going to take us down a road of product development and a little bit of marketing and sort of how you have to live up to the standard that you set for yourself. And then over the next few weeks, we'll also talk a little bit about some of your really cool and unique workforce development programs and how you interact with the community. And we are going to reflect on what it was like to be a Chicago producer of baked goods during the pandemic and how you've overcome that and sort of stage an incredible comeback. And then that's going to lead us into a view of the future for Eli's. So this is going to be a great season, and I'm really excited to dive into all these topics with you both.
Thank you.
We're so excited. Thank you. It's really special to do this because I learned something new from my dad, every time I hear him speak. And it's really nice that I get to have this also in the podcast and able to listen to it for years to come. So thanks, Joanie.
Thank you so much. And I will talk to you guys next week when we dive into what it's like to be the standard setter. Thank you for listening to Troubleshooting Innovation. And a special thanks to this season's sponsor, Oaks, your partner for mixing and depositing process solutions since 1946. Visit www.oaks.com. That's www.oakes.com to learn more about Oaks' R&D lab, equipment rental, and more.